In the heart of imperial Rome, Emperor Nero ordered the unthinkable. He castrated a teenage boy named Sporus so he could take the place of his dead wife, Poppaea Sabina. Days later, in a palace lit by golden oil lamps, Nero staged a wedding unlike any other in Roman history. Dressed in bridal silk and veiled in gold, the boy was led through marble halls before senators, soldiers, and servants who dared not look away. The emperor placed a ring on his hand and declared him his empress. The crowd stayed silent, torn between terror and disbelief, as the most powerful man in the world celebrated a grotesque imitation of love. For Rome, this was not just scandal. It was madness unveiled at the height of empire. The emperor, who once promised renewal, had now crossed the final boundary between ruler and tyrant, between man and monster. How could a man raised to lead the civilized world descend into such depravity, believing that grief could be healed through mutilation and illusion? Before we uncover how power turned into psychosis, subscribe and stay till the end. When Nero first rose to power in 54 AD, Rome celebrated him as a symbol of renewal. The young emperor spoke of justice, lowered taxes, and promised to return to moral balance after years of corruption. The people adored him. He performed for crowds, sponsored games, and patronized artists who praised his vision. For a brief moment, it seemed Rome had found its enlightened ruler. But beneath the gilded surface, cracks were forming. Nero's passion for art grew into vanity, his charm into arrogance, and his kindness into performance. He began to believe that he was not merely emperor, but divine, above law, reason, and restraint. Behind the laughter of banquets and the beauty of music, his mind was quietly turning toward chaos. The same man who sang for peace would soon murder without hesitation, and the promise of Rome's golden age would become its darkest farce. Poppaea Sabina was unlike any woman Rome had ever seen. Born into privilege and trained in the art of persuasion, she possessed both the intelligence of a statesman and the beauty of a goddess. Her presence could silence a room, and her ambition could bend men of power to her will. When she entered Nero's life, she did not come as a lover seeking affection. She came as a strategist seeking control. To Nero, she was perfection incarnate, a living reflection of everything he desired and everything he feared. Their relationship burned with a dangerous intensity, built not on trust but on manipulation, jealousy, and lust for dominance. Poppaea knew exactly how to feed Nero's insecurities, whispering that he was destined to transcend humanity itself, that he was not merely emperor, but divine. With every word, she pushed him further into delusion, isolating him from those who might restrain him. Together, they dismantled Rome's moral order. Rivals were exiled, his mother's influence erased, and his counselors silenced. As Poppaea rose from mistress to empress, her hold on Nero deepened, but so too did his paranoia. He adored her and feared her in equal measure. In the empire's grand palaces, beneath the polished marble and golden ceilings, their love story turned into psychological warfare. What began as passion had become obsession, and in that suffocating blend of power and desire, Rome's emperor was slowly losing his sanity, setting the stage for one of history's most horrifying acts of devotion. At first, Nero's love for Poppaea seemed like devotion, a ruler consumed by passion for his empress. But as the months passed, that love began to mutate into possession. What once appeared as affection became control. Nero could not bear the thought of Poppaea speaking to another man, smiling at another guest, or spending a moment beyond his gaze. The palace that had once been a place of music and laughter turned into a golden cage where every whisper was monitored and every gesture judged. Poppaea, who once manipulated power, now found herself trapped inside it. Nero's jealousy grew into paranoia, and his paranoia into rage. He ordered servants to report her movements, questioned her loyalty, and punished anyone who dared defend her. The emperor, who had once worshipped beauty, now sought to own it completely, believing that to control her was to preserve her. Behind the marble walls of Rome's most powerful palace, the echoes of their arguments replaced the sound of flutes and lyres. For the first time, courtiers saw the cracks in the emperor's mask. The artist was gone, and the tyrant had taken his place. The world outside saw Nero and Poppaea as Rome's divine couple, but inside those chambers, love was dying and fear had taken the throne. In the summer of 65 AD, Nero's palace stood quiet, a place once filled with music, now heavy with tension. The emperor and his wife Poppaea Sabina were once the golden couple of Rome, but love had turned into control and fear. Poppaea was expecting their child, and every word she spoke could light Nero's anger. One evening their voices rose, the argument spun out of control, and in a sudden flash of rage Nero struck her. The room froze, servants stood still, and Poppaea fell. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. By morning the emperor's fury had turned into a strange calm. He ordered a grand funeral, filling the halls with roses, music, and jewels. As if beauty could wash away guilt, the people mourned their empress. But behind closed doors, Rome whispered in fear. They knew what had happened. No one dared speak it. Nero refused to face the truth. In his mind, Poppaea was not gone. She had only moved beyond. His guilt twisted into dreams, his grief into madness. From that moment, the man who ruled the greatest empire on earth began to lose his grip on reality, chasing the memory of the woman he had destroyed. And with her death, the last piece of Nero's soul disappeared into darkness. After Poppaea's death, something inside Nero broke completely. The emperor, who once ruled the greatest empire on earth, now drifted between grief and madness. He refused to accept that she was gone, ordering her body to be treated as if she were still alive. Servants were told to bring perfumes, flowers, and silk sheets to her chamber. Guards were posted outside as if their empress might wake at any moment. The palace smelled of incense and decay, and no one dared speak the truth. Nero would sit beside her, whispering to her, calling her by name, pretending she could still hear him. To the people of Rome, he appeared lost in grief. But behind the walls, it was something far darker. He ordered physicians and priests to preserve her beauty, to keep her skin soft, to stop time itself. Every act of mourning became a ritual of denial. The emperor, who once loved music and art, now filled the palace with mourning songs. His eyes hollow, his voice trembling between prayer and delusion. Days turned into weeks, and his counselors began to fear him. Nero no longer saw the line between life and death. He spoke of omens and visions, claiming Poppaea's spirit still walked the palace halls. What had once been love had now become obsession beyond reason. This was the moment when grief became madness, and Rome's emperor slipped fully into a world built on fantasy, fear, and guilt, marking the true beginning of his downfall. After months of silence and madness, Nero began to drift through the palace like a shadow. Searching for something he could not name, the music had stopped, the laughter had died, and still he wandered, calling Poppaea's name in the dark halls. One morning, during a household inspection, he saw a boy standing among the servants, a quiet, delicate figure no older than 15. His face pale, his eyes lowered. Something about him made Nero stop. The resemblance was undeniable. The boy's features echoed Poppaea's so closely that for a moment the emperor forgot where he was. His voice trembled as he asked the boy's name. They called him Sporus, a slave taken from a wealthy home, trained for service. Nero stared at him for a long time, and in that silence, something dangerous awoke in his mind. He began to see not a boy but an answer, a way to fill the void Poppaea had left behind. His advisors noticed his fixation and grew uneasy. They whispered that grief had blinded their ruler. Some tried to warn him, but none dared speak too plainly, for to question Nero's desires was to invite death. Days passed, and the emperor's interest in Sporus deepened. He ordered him to be brought to his private chambers, not as a servant but as someone special. In the glow of torchlight, Nero looked at the boy and saw not life, but replacement. In that moment the decision was forming, one that would cross every boundary of reason, morality, and humanity. The search for Poppaea's ghost had led Nero to a living mirror, and soon that mirror would be forced to reflect his madness. In the weeks that followed, Nero's mind began to twist reality itself. His grief had turned into a new kind of madness, and Sporus became the center of it. The boy who looked like Poppaea now became her shadow. Nero started calling him by her name, speaking to him as if the empress had returned. To the emperor, this was not illusion. It was proof that fate had given him another chance. Servants watched in silence as Nero dressed Sporus in fine silk, placed jewels around his neck, and whispered to him like a lover. The palace that once mourned Poppaea now stood frozen in disbelief. Even the most loyal advisors could not hide their fear. They saw a man who had completely lost his grasp on truth. Every day, Nero's obsession grew deeper. He demanded Sporus learn Poppaea's gestures, her way of walking, even the tone of her voice. And the boy obeyed, too afraid to refuse. To the outside world, Nero still appeared as Rome's ruler. But inside the palace, he had become something else, a man haunted by his own creation. One evening he announced to his court that Poppaea had returned to him. That love had conquered death. His words were met with silence. No one dared contradict him because in that moment they understood that Nero no longer ruled an empire, he ruled a fantasy, and every person in his presence was trapped inside it, powerless to escape the emperor's vision of rebirth and ruin. In the depths of his obsession, Nero's madness reached its final and most terrifying stage. The emperor, who once spoke of art and harmony, now believed he could command nature itself. To make the illusion complete, he gave an order that froze every soul in the palace. Sporus was to be altered, not for punishment or power, but to make him more like Poppaea. The command was delivered calmly, as if it were a routine decree. No one dared question it. The court physicians stood in silence. Knowing refusal meant death, they obeyed without a word. History records no protest, no struggle, only submission to imperial will, and in that act, Rome witnessed the clearest proof of absolute power. No senate could oppose him, no law could restrain him. What began as grief had become complete detachment from reason. Nero believed he was restoring love. The people whispered that he was destroying humanity itself. The palace corridors fell quiet as the order was carried out, and when it was done, Nero declared that fate had given him what death had taken away. He looked upon Sporus and saw not cruelty but creation. The emperor had crossed the last boundary that separated man from monster. He had turned grief into delusion, and delusion into irreversible action. From that day forward, Nero no longer ruled over men. He ruled over shadows of his own making, and Rome's empire, built on conquest and order, became the stage for one man's descent into the deepest darkness of his own mind. In a chamber deep within the palace, history recorded one of its most chilling moments. The emperor's order had become reality, and no one could look away. The tools were simple: iron blades and bronze clamps, instruments of medicine turned into weapons of obsession. The air was thick with fear and incense. Torches flickered on walls that had seen too much. The physicians worked in silence, their hands trembling. They had no choice, every movement watched by Nero himself. In the empire that ruled the known world, the most powerful man now sought to reshape life itself. There was no anesthesia, no mercy, only the sound of steel, the breath of pain and the weight of command. Blood and prayer mixed in the shadows. time stretched into eternity. And yet, somehow the boy survived, weak and broken, but alive. The physicians whispered that it was a miracle, though they knew it was only endurance. When it was done, Nero smiled. He called it divine success, a victory over death itself. He told his court that Poppaea had returned to him, that fate had restored what had been lost, and no one dared speak the truth. For the truth was unbearable. Sporus was no longer a person. He was an echo, a living monument to one man's madness. Rome had witnessed emperors fall to war and rebellion, but never before had it seen such quiet horror, the kind that left no ashes, only silence, and the memory of pain that time itself could not wash away. After the act was done, Nero's fantasy deepened. The boy who once served as a nameless slave was now the image of a lost empress. The emperor gave him a new name, Sabina, the name that once belonged to Poppaea, and in that moment, reality disappeared completely. The palace became a stage, every corridor a set for Nero's delusion. Servants moved like actors in a play they could not escape. Their lines rehearsed through fear, their gestures shaped by terror. Each morning Sporus was dressed in Poppaea's gowns, layers of silk and gold-threaded fabric that once belonged to Rome's most admired woman. The emperor himself chose the jewels. Her necklaces, her earrings, her perfumes, even her cosmetics. He ordered that no one speak to Sporus as a man again, only as empress, as Poppaea reborn, and the servants obeyed, bowing, greeting him as Lady Sabina, their voices trembling as they tried to hide the truth. Nero would walk beside him through the halls, smiling proudly, whispering endearments once spoken to his lost wife. The court watched in silence, the senators forced to applaud, musicians ordered to play wedding songs. The empire's greatest palace had turned into a theatre built on grief, fear, and madness, and everyone within its walls became part of the performance. To question it was death, to act was survival. And in this strange new world, Nero's illusion stood complete. A false empress crowned by a broken man who could no longer tell the difference between love and the shadow it had left behind. In the days that followed, Nero's control reached deeper than ever before. The emperor had remade the body, but now he sought to remake the mind. Sporus was no longer allowed to exist as himself. He was told to forget his name, his past, his voice. Every part of who he had once been, Nero ordered lessons, long and cruel, in which the boy was taught to move as Poppaea had moved, to speak as she had spoken, to laugh, to breathe, to sit in silence as she once did. Musicians and tutors were called to train him, not in art, but in imitation, each word corrected, each gesture shaped until there was nothing left that belonged to him. Servants watched as he walked through the halls repeating phrases. His eyes empty, his tones soft and broken. The emperor would smile with pride, believing he had brought his lost love back from death. But what stood before him was not Poppaea. It was the shadow of a soul slowly erased. Sporus spoke less each day, his will fading under the weight of Nero's obsession. His silence became the only protest left to him. The palace grew quieter too, as if every wall feared the sound of truth. And so the emperor's fantasy became complete. He had conquered not through war, but through control. He had taken what life could not give him and turned it into a dream that lived only in his mind, a dream that destroyed everything it touched, leaving behind only obedience, silence, and the faint echo of a stolen voice. The day Rome never forgot began not with triumph, but with silence. The streets were lined with guards, the air heavy with disbelief, for the emperor had declared that he would marry again, but this time. The bride was Sporus, the boy the world no longer recognized. The boy now called Sabina. The ceremony was held in full imperial splendor, with musicians, priests, and courtiers summoned under threat. Nero appeared in robes of gold, radiant, confident, a man who had turned grief into theater. Beside him stood Sporus, dressed in a bridal veil of white silk. Trembling, eyes lowered, his face painted to mirror the woman Nero had lost, the crowd dared not react. The priests recited their blessings with shaking hands. As if invoking a curse they could not avoid, vows were exchanged. Rings placed, and in that moment, the greatest empire on earth watched its ruler marry the ghost of his own creation. The senators smiled through fear. The nobles bowed through shame, outside the palace walls. Whispers spread through Rome like smoke. Some called it blasphemy. Others called it madness, but none could stop it, for no one could stop Nero. When the ceremony ended, the emperor led his new bride through the palace halls to cheers that sounded more like prayers for survival. It was not a wedding. It was a declaration that nothing sacred remained. And as torches burned through the night, Rome's heart dimmed a little more, consumed by the spectacle of one man's descent, and the empire's collective silence in the face of it. When the empire began to collapse, the illusion finally cracked. Rebellion spread through the provinces. The legions turned against their emperor, and the streets that once echoed with cheers now filled with whispers of betrayal. Nero fled the city that had crowned him a god, his gold abandoned, his statues torn down. Yet beside him Sporus remained, silent, loyal, broken, the shadow of an empire that no longer existed. They hid in gardens, in ruins, in the homes of those too afraid to speak their names. The emperor who had ruled the world now trembled like a hunted man, clutching the only figure who still called him by name. When the end came, it came swiftly. The Senate declared Nero an enemy of the state, and his own guards vanished at last. In the quiet of a forgotten villa, the emperor took his life, whispering that the world would lose an artist. But for Sporus, there was no escape. He was captured soon after, paraded before those who had hated Nero, his beauty now used as a cruel reminder of the fallen tyrant. Rome's new rulers saw him not as a victim, but as a symbol of shame. They mocked him, forced him to play Nero's bride one last time in a public spectacle meant to humiliate him. And when the laughter turned to cruelty, Sporus chose silence forever, his story ending not with glory, but with the same darkness that had consumed the man who destroyed him. And so the final echo of Nero's madness faded, leaving behind only the memory of a boy who was turned into a dream, and then into a ghost. In the quiet corridors of an empire once alive with laughter and conquest, a shadow lingers, tracing the steps of a soul bound to another's will. The air heavy with whispers of power and loss. A mock ceremony unfolds, gilded and hollow, a stage where dignity is stripped like leaves in winter. Each gaze upon him a quiet weight, pressing into the fragile bones of identity, yet in the stillness of his choice, there is a glimmer of agency, a reclaiming of what the world sought to erase. He turns the final moment inward, folding the chaos of the day into the silence of the night. The walls echo with a stillness that hum, a reminder that even in the grandest palaces, humanity bends beneath the iron of dominion. His passing becomes a quiet defiance, not loud or brash, but a slow, deliberate assertion that control cannot be fully seized. A whisper against eternity, the story lingers in the corners where torchlight trembles, casting shadows that dance like memories too stubborn to fade. It is not the spectacle but the sorrow beneath that resonates, the invisible chains of power, the subtle erosion of the self, every breath a testament to survival and despair intertwined. And as the empire continues, unseeing and unfeeling, a small truth endures. Fragile yet undeniable, that history holds not just the conquerors, but those who stood quietly in the dark, whose lives, choices, and dignity shaped the echoes of what came after, leaving behind a fragile trace in the vast night of time. And perhaps, in remembering them, we reclaim a fraction of what was lost, letting their stories drift like candle smoke into the endless, waiting dark.